Good morning, everyone. My name is Doris Rodriguez, and we'll get started in just a few minutes while we give people a moment to get situated. So if you need to get anything, please do so now. We'll start in just a couple of minutes. I want to be sure to announce that this presentation is available with automatic closed captioning. Additionally, we are providing simultaneous interpretation in Spanish this morning, for which I will now provide instructions for our Spanish Zoom attendees to join. Hoy siempre brindamos servicios de interpretación simultánea para nuestros eventos, igual en persona o en Zoom. Favor de hacer clic en el globo al fondo de su pantalla donde dice interpretación, luego haga clic en el idioma que desea escuchar, en este caso español. Si quiere escuchar solo al intérprete, puede también hacer clic en el Mute Original Audio, que silenciará el audio original. Muchísimas gracias y de nuevo bienvenidos a Sinergia. Estamos agradecidos en tenerlos aquí. So just a second so I can connect to Facebook. Alrighty. So before I begin, as I mentioned, I want to let you know that we'll be broadcasting today's live event via Facebook page. So I want to give a warm welcome to those joining us there. A few housekeeping notes. Everyone who registered via Zoom will receive a copy of the presentation slide via follow-up email within the next few days. A survey will be shared in the chat and a QR code. We will also have time at the end for Q&A, so please, we encourage questions at any time. However, remember this is a public forum and we'll be being broadcasted live on Facebook. As I said, my name is Doris Rodriguez, and I am the Autism Initiative Coordinator here at Synergia's Metropolitan Parent Center. A few words about Synergia's initiative. The Autism Initiative project is funded by a grant from New York City's Council under its Autism Initiative. This project supplements the work of Synergia's Metropolitan Parent Center by bringing an increased awareness to New York City residents, particularly to communities with large Spanish-speaking populations, about the growing number of children diagnosed with autism spectrum disorder. A strong outreach component targets families of children with a suspected or known diagnosis of autism spectrum disorder who are not receiving appropriate educational, health, and other related services. This initiative will link them to other services and supports that meet the individual's needs of children and their families. I want to thank you all for joining us. We are glad that you chose to be with us today. And now, our presenters. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. Doris, thank you so much for that wonderful introduction. It is a pleasure to be here. My name is Kyra Sampson. I am the staff attorney for the Charter Schools Initiative at an organization known as Advocates for Children of New York. And today I am going to be presenting the following webinar entitled Charter Schools Training Fall 2025 alongside my supervisor, Allison Guttu.
Greetings, I'm Allison Guttu. I am a supervising attorney and I coordinate and manage the Pro Bono program at Advocates for Children. Glad to be here, and I'll be mostly looking at the chat to see if there are any questions that we need to get to in the meeting. In general, we'll be holding questions until the end or maybe responding in the chat.
So again, we want to thank you all for joining us today. Allison and I are stoked to be here. But before we jump into the presentation, I just want to provide a little bit of a roadmap for what today's webinar is going to look like. So first, we're going to do a bit of a charter school overview. Then we're going to talk more about charter school enrollment, followed by promotion policy and academic supports in charter schools, followed by special education and charter schools, very, very important topic. And last but certainly not least today, we are going to also discuss charter school discipline policies. But before we jump into the substantive nature and aspects of this presentation, let's jump into a little bit of trivia. So if all participants can please put your responses in the chat box, that would be greatly, greatly appreciated. So my first question is, which of the following is true about a charter school? 1, it is a type of public school. 2, it generally operates independent of the New York City Department of Education. 3, It operates under a charter which is to be renewed every 5 years or 4. All of the above. I'll give folks a second to put their responses in the chat, and let's see which one is the correct answer. I see some responses coming in. I'm getting excited. I'll give folks about a second or two more. Okay. All right, I see responses coming in. Love that folks are engaged. Now, if you selected for all of the above, you are correct, right? All number 1, number 2, number 3, these are all things, all factors that describe a charter school. Now, charter schools are independent public schools, everyone. They are not operated by the local Department of Education. However, they do receive public funding from the state and from the state government and from the federal government. Charter schools are tuition free. They are established upon the submission and the granting of a charter by the state's Department of Education. Now, there are state laws that charter schools should adhere to in order to continue operation. But fun fact, they don't always. We'll get into that a little bit later. One of the state laws that we have in New York State is that charter schools are to be renewed every 5 years. There are a number of other rules and regulations that charter schools must abide by, and we will definitely talk about sources or ways to find out exactly what rules and what policies those are later on in this presentation today. And don't we love it? More trivia, everyone. So again, please put your responses in the chat box. My next question for this group is, what percentage of students attend New York City charter schools? What percentage of students attend New York City charter schools? I'll give everyone, again, a few seconds to respond, put your answers in the chat, and then we will discuss. All right, I'll give folks about a second, 2 more seconds. Okay, all right. If you selected D, you are correct. According to the New York City Charter Schools Center, 150,500 students currently attend charter schools in New York City, or about 15.2% of all students of students in public schools. Some other important facts that the group should know: 82.9% of enrolled students in charter schools identify as economically disadvantaged. 11.4% of enrolled students in charter schools currently live in temporary housing. And 19.3% of enrolled students in charter schools have individual education programs, or IEPs, which we will certainly discuss later. Now let's get a little bit more into the charter school enrollment process. What does that look like? As we discussed earlier, New York City charter schools, or charter schools in general, are tuition-free public schools. During any given year, if a charter school's number of applicants exceeds the number of available seats, then that charter school is legally obligated to conduct a random lottery to ensure all of its seats are filled. Right? Let's talk a little bit more about that. So as we know, charter schools are generally tuition-free public schools, right? Oftentimes, all it takes to get your child enrolled at a charter school is submitting an application. However, if there are more seats, right, more applicants than seats available, what the charter school will oftentimes do is conduct a lottery to figure out who gets to fill those seats, right? According to the New York City charter school system, individuals, however, can generally apply for charter schools by using the Common Online Charter School application. You can submit one application to multiple charter schools via this platform, which is awesome. However, families, please remember that not all charter schools have actually opted into using this online platform. So before you submit your information, before you register for this online platform, make sure that the charter school that you are interested in applying to, you're interested in enrolling your child at, utilizes this online platform for its applications. If you don't feel like using the Common Online Charter School application or if the school that you're interested in does not utilize this platform, feel free to visit that charter school's website, everyone, and apply directly via that website. You can also stop by the charter school front desk and ask for an application. I'm sure someone will be able to assist you. Now let's talk a little bit more about this lottery process. What should stand out about a charter school's lottery process, a lottery system, rather? Well, one, it should be bias-free, right? It's believed that a lottery system is more capable of ridding the selection process of favoritism, of bias, of discrimination. Another key aspect about the lottery system, there is no entry examination. This is important because it's admittedly, exams are not everyone's strong point. Exams are certainly not everyone's forte, and that is a-okay. However, the lottery process eliminates the need for competitive examinations, which certainly do not always demonstrate a student's true intellectual capacity. While there are wonderful things that certainly can stand out about a charter school's lottery system, it's important to remember, folks, that the lottery system is not perfect. Each charter school network may actually take into consideration certain factors when conducting their lottery. For instance, some of the folks at this webinar today may have heard of Success Academy or the Success Academy Charter School Network. This is a charter school network that certainly conducts a lottery, and some factors that they consider everyone or take into consideration when conducting the lottery include whether or not the child has a sibling that was previously enrolled in the network, whether or not the child is actually, the child's parent is a teacher or an employee of the charter school, right? So different factors taken into consideration. So it's always important to make sure you research and familiarize yourself with the lottery process beforehand, okay? All right, now let's talk a little bit about promotion policies and student supports at charter schools. Now, it's important to know that as independent public schools, yes, charter schools are in charge of establishing their own policies, generally. These policies include matters pertaining to academics, matters pertaining to conduct codes, matters pertaining to discipline, matters pertaining to promotion or demotion, right? Some policies may include minimum attendance requirements, may include minimum grade requirements, right? Requiring a grade of 70 or above to pass a class compared to your DOE district school, which may require a 65 or above to pass a class, right? There's also quite a bit of reliance on a student's performance in the standardized setting, right? So what does this mean? On standardized tests, right? They certainly utilize these standardized tests and students' performance to when they certainly consider a student's performance on these examinations when creating their policies. Many charter schools do not offer summer school to students, so it's important to make sure that you really check, parents, before enrolling at a charter school, what promotion policies look like, what demotion policies look like. You have every single right to certainly ask those questions, okay? Now, historically, when considering charter schools, as a result of policies that are arguably arbitrary and inequitable, right? Students in some charter schools tend to repeat grades at higher rates than students at at public or at DOE schools. Some charter school networks even demote students if they believe the student is not on track to pass state exams, right? However, a charter school's administration should always be in communication with a student's parents and/or guardians regarding possible demotion. Before enrolling your child at that charter school, we would advise, or we would say that it's important to ensure that you make sure you understand those policies, parents and guardians, right? If you have any questions, please always seek out someone who you believe can answer them. And also make sure that you have access to the policies, right? Oftentimes a charter school may publish their policies in what's known as a student parent handbook. You may get a physical copy of this handbook at the beginning of the school year, or you may be able to find an online version on the charter school's website. So make sure to look into that as well prior to enrollment. All right. An incredibly important question. Does immigration status of the family matter when enrolling a child at a charter school? No. Your child has a right to go to school regardless of their immigration status or of their family's immigration status. No one can ask about your immigration status. I will repeat that. No one can ask you about your immigration status amidst the enrollment process. If someone knows, they must keep it confidential. Also, if a document asks for your social security number, just leave it blank. That's it. Again, students are entitled to receive all school services, including free lunch, breakfast, transportation, educational services, even if their family or if the student themselves is undocumented. So once again, I want to reiterate this to this group. Does immigration status of family matter? No, it does not. Every single child has a right to attend, right, charter schools here in New York City, regardless of their immigration status or of their family's immigration status. And let's hope it stays that way. Now, let's jump into another trivia question. Again, please be sure to put your responses in the chat. What percentage of students in New York City charter schools are multilingual or English language learners, L learners? A, 20%, approximately 20%, B, approximately 16%, C, approximately 11%, or D, approximately 7%. I'm interested to see folks' responses. See some responses coming in. I love the engagement, everyone. Thanks so much. I'll give folks about 2 more seconds. Put a last minute answer in the chat. All right. The correct answer is C, about 11%. According to New York City, the New York City Charter School Center, 11.1% of enrolled students identify as multilingual learners, which is a 4% increase from the 2020-2021 school year. Very exciting information for sure. Now let's talk a little bit more about multilingual learners in the charter school setting or L learners in the charter school setting and programs that are dedicated to these learners, right? So it's important for everyone to know charter schools must provide English language learning instruction to help students achieve the same educational goals as other students who are not L learners. The New York State Education Commissioner's regulation, specifically Part 154, says all school districts are accountable for identifying and serving L learners. By law, everyone, school districts are required to implement policies related to the education of multilingual learners, L learners, in order to ensure that they have the opportunity to achieve the same educational goals and standards as non-L students. Each school district must provide L students with equal access to all school programs and services offered by the school district. School districts shall provide L learners with bilingual education as well, or ENL, English as a new language programs, right? This includes charter schools within that given school district. Now, although charter schools do have flexibility in how they set up their L programs, this instruction still must enable them to develop academically, allow L learners to develop academically while achieving competence in the English language, okay? Also, it's important to know that teachers must be certified, right? They must have certifications to teach bilingual and or English as a new language classes and programs. However, because certification rules and regulations within the charter school system certainly vary compared to the DOE, right? There may be instances where sometimes at certain schools, certain networks, teachers don't have that certification. Be sure to inquire. Okay, we always want to make sure that we advise parents to advocate for themselves and advocate for their families. And if your student is an L learner, make sure to ask what class they're in and the certifications of the teacher who is teaching that class. All right. Now, language access rights. Okay. Under the Charter Schools Act, charter schools have to meet the same health and safety, civil rights, and student assessment requirements as other public schools, except as otherwise noted in the Act. In terms of parent rights to translation and interpretation, right, the Civil Rights Act would apply to charter schools, which requires them to abide by anti-discrimination laws, which forbid discrimination based on national origin, right? Translation. What does this mean? Well, if you need materials that are not, if you need materials that are in another language outside of English, right? Some things that can be translated look like letters, right? Forms, meeting notices, report cards, special education documents. These are materials that should be translated for you if you need them translated. Okay, be sure to ask, once again, school administrators for these translated materials. Also, you may need interpretation, especially when it comes to your student's IEP meeting, parent-teacher conferences, suspension hearings. You are allowed, you have a right to interpretation in these settings. These settings include, again, parent-teacher conferences, IEP meetings, suspension hearings, special education hearings, and at any DOE office in general. It's important that schools provide parents with information in a language they can understand. This better equips the parent to certainly advocate for their child. Schools must have appropriate and competent individuals providing translation and providing interpretation. They cannot rely on students, siblings, friends, or untrained school staff to translate and to interpret for parents. Now, let's talk a little bit about students with disabilities in charter schools, right? When you think about a student with disabilities, you may think about a student who has physical disabilities. Maybe they're ambulatory, right? They may be in a wheelchair. They may need some sort of assistance walking and or generally moving throughout the building, right? But you also think about students who may have more emotional, cognitive, right, disabilities that impede them from operating in ways that students who don't have disabilities operate, right? That is A-okay, right? Before we jump into students with disabilities in charter schools, I want to ask the group a question. We spoke about IEPs earlier, but I wonder if anyone here can define what an IEP is. What is an IEP and why is it so important? Feel free to put some sort of response in the chat. Doesn't have to be perfect. I see Anita. Thank you, Anita, for breaking down that acronym. We'll certainly get to those key letters and what they mean in a second. For some folks, this may be the first time that they are learning about IEPs, and that is also A-okay as well. We're going to talk more about what they are and how they can certainly help students. All right, so what is an IEP? An IEP, also known as an individual education program, is a written statement of an educational department's plan to provide support to a child, more specifically to ensure that a child receives a FAPE. A FAPE is also known as a free, appropriate public education, right? So the purpose of the IEP is to ensure that the child is a written plan that ensures that the child receives a FAPE, and they receive that FAPE in the least restrictive environment that's needed for that child. Before we jump in, though, as always, not trivia, but true or false. Charter schools must provide the services on a student's IEP. Is it A, true, or is it B, false? As always, feel free to put that response in the chat.
Here, if you can repeat the question somebody said.
For sure, definitely. Charter schools must provide the charter schools must provide the services on a student's IEP. A, true, or B, false? All right. Thank you, Doris. I see some folks coming. I see some responses coming in. Some from Facebook. I love it. Thanks, folks on Facebook, for the engagement. All right. Let's discuss. The correct answer is A, true. All right.
And
So sorry,
correct,
everyone.
we have a note from Facebook that the IEP is a legal document. That's correct.
That is correct. Thanks, Allison, for letting us know. I love the engagement on Facebook, folks. Let's keep it up. All right. So let's talk about this true or false answer, right? Special education criteria, including evaluations, placement timelines, etc., applicable to New York City DOE students, also applicable to charter school students, right? Charter schools are required, everyone, to provide students with the special education program and services on their IEP as written. An educational institution's ability or inability to provide a student services is not considered when drafting one's IEP. What is discussed in that IEP meeting is what services are needed for this child and how do we ensure that this child, that the student gets those services, period. That's it. If schools cannot provide the specific recommended program on a student's IEP, they must provide specially designed instruction for the student. We will talk more about what specially designed instruction means later on in this webinar. Now let's talk about the IEP process in charter schools. What does that look like? From start to finish, how do I ensure that, how do I figure out whether or not my child needs an IEP? And if they do need an IEP, how do I ensure that they get that IEP? And how do I ensure that those services are implemented, right? So students with disabilities in charter schools who need IEPs follow the same process as students in district schools. We have five parts to this process: referral, consent by the parent, evaluation, IEP development, and placement and services. Now let's talk a little bit about referrals. Specifically, referrals are made directly to the charter school or to the Committee on Special Education where the charter school is located. Like district schools, the charter school can make a referral for an evaluation to the CSE. Each charter school should actually be assigned a CSE case manager, so make sure you ask about that during the enrollment process or at the top of the school year if your child was already enrolled in the school and continues to matriculate through that school, through that network, that charter school network. When a referral is made, charter schools should provide the DOE with information about pre-referral intervention services, which may have looked like academic intervention services, also known as ASI, or response to intervention services, also known as RTI services, that were provided to the student before they were referred to the CSE, okay? The DOE requests this information right? To ensure that schools are providing supports to students and also to better identify what the school has already tried for that student and what special education supports might better serve that student, might be more appropriate, right? Because we want to make sure that that child receives a FAPE, a free, appropriate public education. If a student is in grades K through K, or excuse me, K through 5, and they're being referred due to a possible learning disability or some other sort of diagnosis, a description of the methodology, interventions, and or strategies used must be included on the request form. Again, this is for students in kindergarten through 5th grade. However, in the same way as district schools, pre-referral interventions do not stop special education processes for students. This is important to know. All right, let's continue with evaluations now. We talked about referrals. Now we're talking more about evaluations. Who evaluates the child, right, when trying to figure out whether or not the student is supposed to receive an IEP? The DOE evaluates students, but charter schools can also evaluate students at the DOE's discretion. Okay. All right, let's talk more about IEPs and charter schools. So, charter school must provide student-specific information. The charter school, which also should propose programs and services. However, please note that these programs and services require a parent's consent, and the parent can cut off these services at any time. Charter schools should also provide special and general education teachers where appropriate. They must provide these teachers at the IEP meeting. Okay? So, according to the IDEA, the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, a teacher who is familiar with the student should attend their IEP meeting. This also means that the CSE should not have a special or general education teacher from the CSE simply stand in for the student's teacher during that IEP meeting. A charter school representative who is aware of these programs and curriculum and they're able to interpret a student's progress and school assessments may also attend the IEP. However, again, this individual, this charter school representative, is also not allowed to replace the student's teacher, right? Before I continue, I'd love to ask the audience, why do we think it's important to have a student's teacher at an IEP meeting? Feel free to drop a response in the chat. Why would it be important to have a student's teacher at the IEP meeting? All right, let's just talk about it. Let's think. Well, for one, right, a teacher knows a student. This is the teacher who's hopefully has been in the classroom with this child for the entire duration of the school year, right? This teacher's familiar with the student's attendance, right? The student's family, the student's work ethic, right? The teachers are familiar with subject matter areas where the student may be thriving, and subject matter areas where the student may still need some supports. Essentially, teachers know students or should know students like the back of their hand, right? Which is why it's important to have that teacher at that IEP meeting to advocate for that child in ways that other folks around that table may not be able to advocate for that child simply because of their daily engagement, right? Their daily high level of engagement with that student. Yeah, I'm seeing some responses for sure, right? They have a lot of data, definitely when it comes to the student, a ton of data. They know the student's assessments. Again, they know the student's attendance record, right? How they're attending school. They know the student's family. They may have spoken to the parents before about a student's progress in the classroom. This is certainly why it's important to have a teacher at those meetings. Let's continue. So again, It's important to note that some charter school networks actually have staff that they send to IEP meetings as opposed to teachers, but that should not happen. If you see that happening at your child's charter school network, make sure you alert someone, make sure you ask questions, right? Make sure you let them know, hey, right, I want my child's teacher at the IEP meeting. Again, charter school representatives who attend the IEP meeting must be knowledgeable about special education resources and programs available at the school. We want to make sure that this is clear because the issue does come up. And if an IEP meeting does not have the required team members and or a parent hasn't agreed for a certain team member to be excused from the IEP meeting, you can certainly bring that up with your child's charter school's administration, and you can request that the meeting be rescheduled in order to ensure that the appropriate people who need to be there are in fact there. Some more information about IEP development, right? Student's needs drive the recommendation, not the services available at the charter school. Now, the DOE, the charter school, and parents should be thinking about a combination of appropriate sources, services, and supports that the student can receive at that charter school. Again, the CSC is not simply recommending only the services that are offered at their charter school. No, the CSE is recommending the services that are appropriate for that particular student. Okay. A parent can invite anyone with knowledge of the child to the IEP meeting. Also, if you are a non-English speaker, you have the right to have a translator available at the IEP meeting. You can also request the IEP once it's developed, once it's issued in your language after the IEP meeting. Now, earlier we spoke a little bit about some language, right? Specially designed instruction, right? When considering how an IEP should be, what should be included in an IEP for a student. Now, this language comes from the IDEA and New York State education regulations. It means that there should be an adaptation, of content, methodology, or delivery of instruction to address a student's unique needs, right, as a result of that student's disability. It should ensure access to the general education curriculum so that the student can meet the same educational standards that apply to all students. Again, these are the sorts of services, methodology, delivery of instruction, that sort of information that should be included on a child's IEP. This specially designed instruction means that a charter school must take special care to develop an IEP. An IEP is an incredibly important document, folks, and it's important that, again, a lot of care goes into the creation of the IEP. So instead of a charter school administrator simply saying, oh, we don't have a 12 to 1-to-1 here, right? The student needs to go to a district school, right? The charter school instead needs to figure out what unique set of services and support that student needs, and needs to figure out how to get those services for the student within those four walls of that school, okay? Now, let's talk about what the DOE must do when it comes to special education in charter schools and what the charter school must do. A bit of a summary of what we've discussed thus far, right? The DOE is responsible for evaluating students and holding IEP meetings. Generally, the CSC regional office, where the charter school is located, is responsible for evaluations and IEPs of students attending the charter school. Now, while the charter school can and should attend the student's IEP meeting and provide information like teacher reports, it is the DOE, everyone, that is responsible for actually creating and ensuring the accurateness and the appropriateness of that IEP. So again, the DOE must evaluate students, must determine eligibility, must revise and amend IEPs, and also must declassify students. So if students at some point may know if they no longer need an IEP, it is the DOE's job, it's their role to declassify that student. What must the charter school do? Well, we discussed that, right? Provide programs and services directly to the student, regardless of the services that are actually within the charter school network. or provide services through a contract agency, or provide the DOE, or excuse me, ask the DOE to provide services. I would say bullets 2 and 3 really come into play when a charter school knows that a student needs to be served in a certain way, but they don't have those services. They're to look outside, right? Ask the DOE to provide those services, or look for a service provider outside of their four walls to make sure that that student gets the services that they need. Okay. When it comes to promotion of students with disabilities in charter schools may use their own promotion criteria for students with IEPs, and also request modified promotion criteria on a student's IEP. This information is not always discussed in a charter school's handbook, right? Parent-student handbook. But I would say prior to enrolling your child at a charter school, if you know they do have an IEP, make sure to ask. Make sure to ask about how that charter school network approaches students with IEPs and the supports that they offer, and the guarantee, and whether or not they can guarantee that that student is going to get the supports that they need. Okay. Now, if you have questions about the special education process in New York City charter schools, you can also refer to this guide, the New York City Department of Education's Guide to Special Education Procedures for Students attending charter schools. However, please note, everyone, that this guide has not been edited since 2019, so it is pretty dated. However, you can visit the New York State Education Department's website, specifically the page on policies, procedures, and resources for all charter schools, to read more updated information about charter school rules, regulations, and policies. Okay. All right. Let's talk a little bit about Section 504 of the Rehabilitative Act and charter schools. Now we know, right, charter schools operate independent of the local DOE, right? They're independent public schools. They receive public funds from the state, from the federal government, and thus, because charter schools receive federal funding, they are required to follow Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act. This means charter schools cannot discriminate against students with disabilities. If your child has an IEP, folks, and you want to enroll them at a charter school, the charter school cannot turn you, your family, your child away simply because that child has an IEP. That is not okay, and that is going against federal law. In addition, charter schools must provide reasonable accommodations to students. Right? Now, students with disabilities under Section 504 are entitled to a FAPE. We've heard this acronym before, right? A free, appropriate public education. They're entitled to reasonable accommodations, right? So that they can, which may better help them, better serve them to partake or to benefit from school programs, school services that are offered. Now, let's talk a little bit about requesting a 504 plan, right? Charter schools should inform parents of a student's right to 504 accommodations. Now, you may be asking yourself, how is a 504 plan? Or you may be asking yourself maybe how it's different from an IEP, whether it's different from an IEP. A 504 plan serves a bit of a different purpose than an IEP, I can tell you that. Whereas IEPs serve as a mechanism that really cater to a student's individual needs, right? Think specialized teaching recommendations, specialized instruction, specialized transportation, specialized services. A 504 more so focuses on providing adjustments for a student in an academic setting in order to remove barriers to regular education in school. So think accommodations, right? Think classroom accommodations, breaks, testing accommodations, physical modifications. These things I would say really fall under that 504 plan. And parents, you can request a 504 plan from your charter school. Again, you can request a 504 plan from your charter school. All right. We just focused on special education in charter schools and services that charter schools must provide, right, for special education students. Now we're going to talk a little bit about discipline. students' rights and protections, generally when it comes to discipline in charter schools, as well as the rights and protections for students with disabilities in charter schools. But of course, as always, right before jumping more into substantive matter, let's do a quick true or false question. Please feel free to put your answer in the chat. Charter schools in New York City must follow the Department of Education's discipline code. Is this A, true, or B, false? We've been doing incredible with engagement. Let's keep it up. Okay. All right. Again, the question is, charter schools in New York City must follow the DOE's discipline code. The correct answer is B, false. As we mentioned earlier, charter schools aren't required to follow. I see the engagement. I love the emojis floating up. Yes, I was surprised when I learned this myself. But we'll get into it. We'll talk more about it, everyone, right? So again, the correct answer is B, false. As we mentioned earlier, charter schools aren't required to follow local regulations or discipline policies, including the discipline code. And this is because, again, they operate independent of, right, the city's DOE, right? Now, let's talk about discipline in charter schools, how it's different, how there's some differences and some similarities, right? So we know charter schools create their own discipline policies, right? The DOE's discipline code does not apply, but federal due process rules do apply, everyone, right? So a charter school's discipline policies must be consistent with the requirements of due process and with federal laws and regulations governing placement of students with disabilities. When I say federal due process, does anyone know exactly what I mean, or can someone give me an example of what due process on the federal level may look like? What are some things that should happen in order to ensure that due process is being adhered to? I'll wait a few seconds for some responses in the chat, but as always, we will definitely talk about this. Okay, all right. So when I think about due process, I'm wondering whether or not there was notice. Was the family notified that a student was disciplined? I'm thinking about, was there a hearing, right? Was there a meeting of the minds between school administrators, between the student's parents, the student, right, to discuss, right, what behavior may have led to discipline? I'm thinking, was there an appellate process? Hey, okay, was there a hearing, and then was there a conclusion from that hearing? And if I didn't agree with that conclusion, can I appeal that decision? Right? These are some things that I'm considering or I'm thinking about when I talk about due process. Okay. Now, discipline in charter schools. Oftentimes, what you may see, some sort of the types of discipline that you'll see in a charter school may vary or it may not, right? But certain kinds of discipline that are lawful include in school suspensions, right? Out of school suspensions and expulsion. However, there's certainly conduct that occurs in a charter school on the discipline level that is not permitted by law. This includes suspensions for undefined periods of time, right? An example of this would be, Sammy was suspended indefinitely, or school administrators told Sammy that he's suspended until they tell him that he can come back to school. That is a clear, undefined period. There are no set hours, no set days, right? That are that Sammy was notified about, right, in terms of his suspension, his suspension sentence, that is not okay. Automatic trigger suspensions, right? Automatic suspensions that kick in if the student commits a certain offense without any additional due process protections, right? What may this look like? Oh, okay. If the student, hits 3 students in any given school day, right? That may be like an automatic trigger suspension. That is not okay. Conditional returns after suspension. What does this look like? Oh, Sammy, you can return to school as long as you X, Y, and Z. That is not okay. Shortened schedules. Let's give an example of that. Okay, a student can return to school, but they can only attend school between the hours of 8 a.m. and 1 p.m. when the full school day is from, let's say, 7:30 a.m. to 3 p.m. That's a shortened schedule. That is not okay. And then we have double jeopardy, right? If there was prior discipline, suspension, or consequence given a student's behavior, right, they then can't be suspended for that offense. This includes mediation. So what schools can do is they can refer to prior suspensions as anecdotal evidence, right, in a hearing or at another point in time in the future. But there must be a new offense as well being discussed, right? Can't be discussing the same old offense that we had previously adjudicated. That is not okay. All right. Now due process, right? We talked a little bit about due process about 2 slides ago. Let's really get into it. Parents have a right to notice. Notice is a huge part, folks, of due process in general. Notice of the charges and the basis of the accusation, right? Parents need to know this information. Parents have a right to receive notice before a suspension unless the student poses a continuing danger or ongoing threat of disruption, and notice as soon as possible after the suspension if immediate removal is allowed. Notice can look different. Notice can be given orally, or notice can be given in written format. I would say make sure you have that notice. Okay. I would say because we're dealing with something as serious as discipline, a student potentially being suspended or expelled, right? I would get that notice in writing. I would encourage you folks to get that notice in writing if you find that your student is involved in this sort of disciplinary process. Okay. Due process, the right to be heard. Another important right, excuse me. So students have the right to an explanation of the evidence and a chance to tell their side of the story before they're suspended, unless there's a continuing danger to people or property or an ongoing threat of disruption to the academic process. Students cannot be forced to give a statement against their own interests. I will say this again. Students cannot be forced to give a statement against their own interests. Okay? Now, oftentimes when we're considering discipline, right, schools may discern between short-term suspensions and long-term suspensions. Now, when it comes to the charter school networks, they are permitted, since they operate independently of the DOE, they are allowed to define, right, they're allowed to define short-term suspensions and long-term suspensions on their own. So whereas the DOE generally, when it comes to short-term suspensions, define short-term suspensions as time outside of the school setting for about, I want to say 6 days or less, and then long-term suspensions as suspensions, so right, outside instruction that a student receives, or student instruction that a student receives outside the school building for 6 days or more. Charter schools may define that short-term suspension differently, and they may also define that long-term suspension differently. Okay, so make sure, again, during that enrollment process, you inquire or you try to find in that handbook information on how long is a short-term suspension for this network and how long is a long-term suspension for that network. Okay? So hearings are an important part of the disciplinary process, right? A school must prove the charges at a disciplinary hearing. There must be a hearing officer as well attending this meeting of sorts, right? And that officer must be impartial and base their decision on evidence presented at the hearing. Parents have the right to call witnesses, the right to submit evidence, and the right to be represented by counsel. And hearings must be on the record. Okay? What happens at the hearing must be captured, right? Must be written down, must be documented. If you need an interpreter, again, we know from our earlier discussion regarding L learners, regarding just language access rights in charter schools. If you need an interpreter, if you need translation, you have a right to both of those things. Now, appeals. Remember, let's say there's a hearing. There's a decision from that hearing and you do not agree with that decision. You have a right to appeal that decision. Grievance procedures come from the New York State Charter Schools Act, not individual schools' policies. So if you do not see any sort of information or a section on the grievance procedures within a charter school network's handbook, remember, you still have a right to appeal, okay? And that right comes from the New York State Charter Schools Act. Appeals go to the Charter Schools Board of Trustees, the Charter School Authorizer, and the Board of Regents. Now let's talk a little bit about suspensions and students with disabilities. So the committees on special education must conduct expedited evaluations for students who are students with disabilities who are going through the disciplinary process, and they must hold MDR meetings, manifestation determination review meetings. Charter schools must hold MDRs for students with 504 plans. Now, you may be asking yourself, hey, what is an MDR again? There have been so many acronyms today during this presentation, so if you are asking this question, totally A-okay. An MDR is a meeting to decide if the student's behavior, right, was caused by the student's disability or was a result of the school's failure to follow the student's individual education program or behavior intervention program, right? Two things here. Got to have an MDR. I know, let's say, you have a student, you have a child, the child has an IEP. Unfortunately, there have been disciplinary procedures that your child are now engaged in. An MDR must occur. The reason for that MDR, one, to either figure out whether or not that student's behavior was caused by the student's disability or what happened was caused by the disability, or whether or not it was a result of the school's failure to follow the student's IEP or behavior intervention plan. Now, what happens if the conclusion, right? So what the conclusion that everyone comes to at the end of that MDR meeting is, yes, this was a manifestation. Well, the student returns to school. The CSE conducts a functional behavioral assessment, also known as an FBA, and a behavioral intervention plan, a BIP. However, they do need a parent's consent to engage in these evaluations. So make sure you know that. Make sure you are clear on the fact that you have to provide consent for these evaluations to take place. If not, if the conclusion is no, this was not a manifestation, the suspension does continue. However, the CSE must consider doing an FBA and a BIP, and they also must determine placement and services during the suspension. So during suspension, right, during time outside of usual instruction, inside of usual academic instruction, inside of an academic building, that student still has to get their services. Okay? All right. So really quickly, some takeaways from today's webinar. We spoke about enrollment. We spoke about promotion, demotion criteria. We spoke about special education students in charter schools. We spoke about discipline procedures in charter schools. We spoke about L learners in charter schools. Here are some key things that we would love for our audience members to take away today. Charter schools cannot refuse to educate multilingual learners, L learners, or students with disabilities. Charter schools should offer specially designed instruction to students with IEPs who need unique supports and services. Remember, what's included in the IEP should not only be the services that that charter school can provide. Nope, it's the services that that school needs. And it's the charter school's job to make sure, regardless of whether or not they actually have those services in their building, it's their job to make sure that the child gets those services provided to them. Students suspended from charter schools get due process. Parents as well, get that notice, right? Have those hearings. Make sure you engage in that appellate process and also have the right to alternative instruction if the suspension does continue. They have the right to continue receiving those services during suspension outside of the school setting, outside of the school building. And make sure students with IEPs get MDRs, manifestation determination review meetings, when they are suspended. All right, everyone. I want to thank you all so much for attending today's webinar. The engagement has been absolutely incredible. During this time, we're going to take some questions. But again, I just wanted to thank you all for attending for as long as you could. If you have any questions that may be specific to you, maybe specific to a family member, a friend, and you want more information than we may be able to provide during this limited time, please email us at info@advocatesforchildren.org. And last but certainly not least, everyone, we do have an evaluation, a workshop evaluation form that we would love for you to fill out. We'd love for you to give us your feedback. Let us know what you thought about today's webinar, the information, whether you're looking for more information next time. We have the link here projected on the presentation. However, Allison is going to put the link in the chat. So please fill that out when you are able. Again, I want to thank everyone so much for attending today. It's been a pleasure being here with you all, and I look forward to seeing you all again sometime soon. Thanks again, folks. Now we will jump into some questions.
All righty. I don't think this is a question. It just says busing. So I don't know if it's pertaining to busing. Señora Cuadra, usted escribió autobús. No sé si quiere comentar un poquito más específico sobre la pregunta suya. Hmm. Let me also look at our Facebook to see if we have any questions there.
I'll just add also too at the beginning, someone had submitted a written question about how families can hold charter schools accountable when they are having students being pushed out because of a disability.
That's a good question. Allison, actually, can you repeat that question so that we make sure folks really hear that?
Absolutely. How can families hold charter schools accountable if they have students that are being pushed out of the charter school because of their disability?
Really, really good question, really deep question. So it's important for you to know, again, from this webinar, I hope all of you got this from the webinar, that your child, right, your student with an IEP has a right to attend that charter school, and that charter school needs to or should provide that student with all of the services that that student needs and requires. Now, if you are unfortunately finding that you are engaged in just, maybe some hostile relations or hostile conversations with charter school administrators, I would say file a grievance. File a complaint against the charter school, especially if you know the charter school's handbook like the back of your hand, you've gone through it, and you found that the administrators within that network at that school are not adhering to their own rules and regulations, right, that are publicized, whether it be in a handbook, a physical handbook, or online on their website. You can definitely file a grievance and speak with that network's board of trustees. Great question. Really great question.
And just to add to that too, if you are finding push out, you can certainly also contact the Committee on Special Education for your child and let them know what's happening, what your concerns are, and see if there's anything that they can do. And of course, that as always, as we've put in the chat, and as Kyra mentioned, if you wanted to speak further with an advocate or education specialist, you can contact us at the helpline, which is 866-427-6033. I'll put it in the chat again, or at info. I think it's info at AFC. Info at advocatesforchildren.org.
And I see we have a question on the chat. My son gets busing, but he's late because of late pickup. Other kids won't be excused while in high school. He was excused in elementary and middle school. So if he would be excused while he's attending high school due to the late bus drop off and pickup.
So the excusal policies are probably charter school specific. I would say oftentimes, I mean, it certainly depends on the network, but if you want to look back at that handbook, Mom, and see whether or not there's information regarding just the excusal policy in general within that handbook, I think that would be important to do. But I would also say contact the busing company and figure out whether or not, right, pickup time can be shifted. Pickup time, drop-off time can be shifted to ensure that that the student is not late to school. Because administrators want students to arrive at school on time, right? So that they can ensure that the student gets all the instruction that they need. I would also say maybe have a conversation with administrators about what's going on and figure out the ways in which you guys can work together to ensure that, one, there's conversation or there's future communication with that busing company to figure out the appropriate drop-off pickup time. And two, right, just to give administrators, faculty notice that, hey, this is what's going on. We're trying to figure it out, but we know it's something that we need to work towards, and we are, we look forward to obviously working with you to ensure that the student gets to school on time. Allison, any thoughts?
No, I think that's correct. I mean, charter schools should not be marking a student late for an absence that they can't control. But yeah, I mean, it's going to vary from charter school to charter school, but definitely take that advocacy with the busing company, with the Office of Pupil Transportation, with the Committee on Special Education, for sure.
Alrighty, so we don't have any more questions. So with that, I want to say thank you for joining us today. We hope that you enjoyed today's presentation on rights of students in charter school. A special thanks to our presenters for leading this webinar on such a topic. We really appreciate it. If anyone has any questions that they would like to share with our presenters directly, please let me know and I will get them to them. Thank you again, everyone, and I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day. Thank you again. Bye-bye.
Thanks, everyone.